had lots of secretary estates that kept, there's a lot of
Yeah,
secretary estates. And Justine Greening was particularly great, but had great vision, but would never make a decision. So you end up getting a vacuum, and Nick Gibb filled that vacuum. Rightly or wrongly, for good or for bad.
Well, he gave some stability.
Civil servants are there to keep us.
Well, true, but they don't in a lot of ways because they're constantly pivoting between contrasting demands, aren't they? Sorry.
Apologies for shouting. It's nice to hear some buzz in the room. I just wanted to say a few words just to welcome everybody to our annual Bushy St James Trust Conference. It's our fourth one that we've done, and we're really, really delighted to have colleagues from Faulkner School here. So can we give them a round of applause and say welcome? It's great that some of you are also contributing to the workshop programme today, so we really appreciate you being in the room. It reminds me that we've always been a trust that collaborates and understands the power of collaboration, not just within the schools within our trust, but also with other schools in Hertfordshire and beyond. And a couple of years ago, we were very privileged to have all of our colleagues from Chesborough Pupil Referral Unit come to our conference. And also a couple of years ago, we opened up the conference through the By Leaders for Leaders network and had delegates from as far afield as Devon and Southeast region coming to our conference. So we're very much into talking to people, creating those genuine networks. And I'd really encourage you to do that today. So talk to somebody you don't know today. Ask them what they do, what their role is, pick their brains, get some ideas about education, because that can only benefit the children, not only in our care, but also in the local area. So please do that today if you're up for that. We need to say a huge thank you to everybody that's organised this conference, but I've got a lady sitting in front of me here who we know well, Danielle Bowe. She's our lead practitioner for English and whole school literacy, but more importantly, she works across the trust, connects in with teaching learning leads in the local area, and she has masterminded the whole day today, along with a team of people. I know so many people have helped out. But just, Danielle, we want to say a huge thank you to you. I know you're sitting there nervously. You said leave the thank yous to the end of the day, but can we give her a round of applause? Thank you. And I know what it's like. I hope you can enjoy the day. A mammoth piece of organisation, but thank you for all your hard work. Just to my left, we have Tanya Rule, who's the head of School Standards and Accountability. I have to think about that title. Tanya oversees, I think, 500 schools in Hertfordshire, and she's really, really kindly agreed to come and say a few words at the beginning of our conference this morning. And the reason for that is she visited our trust 2 weeks ago, and you gave up a whole day to visit Hartlepool Primary School, Bushymead School, Little Reading School. She spoke to as many students and staff as possible, but obviously inevitably in a day you can't say hello to everyone. And she very kindly just came to agree to come this morning, just to say a few words, but allow everybody to put a face to a name. So Tanya, can I say thank you so much for coming this morning? I'm going to hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I rather rashly agreed to come here this morning. So when Jeremy said talk to somebody you don't know, listen, lots of people here who I don't know who I'm talking to. I did give up a whole day. It was a lovely day. I really, really enjoyed the day visiting all your schools in Hartlepool, Little Reading, Bushymead. Love talking to your students who are just amazing students. And what I noticed that I don't think that any of the students were cherry picked, and they were just so honest and open. But the most important thing I kind of found from the students, they were just so happy to be here, which was really, really great, and really just enjoying their learning. And I think that is, you know, down to you, down to staff, down to the dedication that you give to teaching and learning of these students and developing these students and developing their character. And it was a really, really special day for me. Now, it may have also coincided with the fact it was the first day out of my tiny little home office for 18 months. But nevertheless, it was just really, really enjoyable to talk to all the staff who were also very passionate about what they were doing. And all your lovely students. Now, I work for the local authority. Jeremy has said I oversee 500 schools. Don't oversee 500 schools exactly, but because, you know, I work with the local authority schools, and of course most of you are working in Academy Trust here. But we, in Hertfordshire, we have the family of schools. And it doesn't matter what kind of school you are, because everyone is teaching our Hertfordshire children, and it is our in Hertfordshire, it's Hertfordshire County Council, it's our aim to make sure that all Hertfordshire children go to a great school, regardless of what type of school there is. So we do work with all our Academy Trusts, and it's really important for us to develop links with Academy Trust, and I'm really pleased to be able to say hello to everyone. I'm not going to talk for much longer, because I know David is much more of an interesting speaker than I am. But it's just lovely to be here, and it's lovely to see you all, and I think you're doing a really fantastic job, and I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you, Tanya. I really appreciate you saying that this morning. So I'm going to hand over to Tanya now.
Good morning, colleagues. I can smile now because Melda said David Didau has arrived, and that's all 5 to 50-minute workshop and then a good 20-25 minutes reflection time. And you will find Chromebooks available for use during that if you want to begin your planning. For those of you who are not Bushy Needs colleagues, you'll find all of the login details that you need on the back here, including how to access Wi-Fi. And those colleagues who are presenting workshops, first of all, a sincere thank you. I've seen all of your materials, I know it's going to be fantastic. And I really appreciate the time and care that you have taken to produce something that will be stimulating and worthwhile for our colleagues. I really do appreciate it. Your login details have been emailed to you, so you'll need to access the PCs. And straight after here, most of the worksheet shop colleagues I know have brought USBs and things like that, but what I will always also do is ensure that you have a link sent to you for the Google folder where all of the resources are in, so you can access the resources you sent to me last week. The final thing, colleagues, is the survey. I have emailed everybody, and you'll find either on our homepage or via a link in your email a link to the survey for today. Now, you can access that survey as many times as you want. You can save, you can come back into it. And genuinely, we read all responses, and what you write shapes future events like this. So I do want to hear from you, the good, the bad and the ugly, although I predict the good all day. But I do want to hear from you, and we will use it to shape future events. So I've given David a double page spread in here, so I'm going to say no more and allow you to introduce yourselves. I don't think David Didau needs much introduction, but I can't tell you how excited I am that we've managed to secure you this year. We tried last year. Things happened last year. I'm not quite sure what was going on last year. But thank you very much. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Don't clap at the beginning. Sure, something of low expectations, Patrick.
No, okay. Well, thank you very much for being. I recognise that thanking you for being here is kind of, you have to be here, don't you, whether you want to be or not. But thanks anyway, and thanks everyone at home who hasn't bothered to show up. But you're the people that have shown up. So lovely to be here, and I'm going to talk to you for about what's the timing, Danielle? An hour, okay. So about this, and we'll. I've got to stay more or less here, so George can record me. So I'm sorry if that comes as across as a bit stilted. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea first of all. I think you'll be relatively familiar with it, and I wanted to. I think this is not something that we like being reminded of particularly, but I think most of us accept that it's true, that when there's all sorts of data sets around the world, not just in the UK, which show that socioeconomic status is the overwhelming factor that's most highly correlated with how well students do in education, and obviously there's not much we can do about that. But this second point. More controversial, and I'm not, and more of an opinion. But I'm going to sort of try and lay this idea out as we go. I think the default of how schools and the school system is set up disproportionately advantages those children who are already most advantaged. That it's for them, it works for them. And the children who are most marginalised, schools, and they recognise this themselves. School's not for them, and school is like, it often feels like a foreign country, and something that they feel alien in, and we set out our stall for another group, and we don't do this deliberately. And I want to suggest as well that it isn't fate. It doesn't have to be that way, but it typically is. And I don't know, I don't know enough about your schools to make any claims about what you're doing, and so I'm not wagging my finger. I'm just sort of saying that this is the big picture. But one of the choice that I think we all get to make every day, several times a day, is about whether that's going to continue to be the case. And I want to suggest to you that all of the actions, all of the choices that you make are either gap widening or gap narrowing. And the gap widening choices that we tend to make are inadvertent. I don't think there are people going, I really want to make sure those disadvantaged kids do a bit worse. I don't think those people exist. Even people that you disagree with and don't like, we all want to do the best. Everyone who's working in education has that ambition to do the best for children. But inadvertently, I think we do end up widening the gap. And gap narrowing, I think, has to be more deliberate. It happens less by chance. It has to be more carefully thought through. It's not the default, is the argument that I'm making. So this idea, or the ideas that I'm going to talk through with you this morning, are hopefully, or certainly in my mind, aligned to this idea of being gap narrowing, of being disproportionately beneficial to the least advantaged of our students. So we'll see, and you can judge. Does that sound okay? Okay, a couple of nobs, a couple of frowns, a couple of people checking their watches. We'll see how it goes. So I'm going to be talking about learning, and I always think it is worthwhile giving you a definition. So this is mine, and you're welcome to disagree with it, and you're welcome to sort of think, well, hang on, there's probably more to it than that, and that's fine, there probably is. But I think it's at least this. And I think so. We've got these two facets that to talk about. The first one is about how long things last. So we know that if you teach somebody something and they can't remember it tomorrow, that's a bit rubbish. It's not what we're after. And the idea of transfer is about flexibility, how well children can apply things in new contexts, and again, if they can't, that's a real disappointment. We want them to be able to we want them, whatever else we want, we at least want them to transfer from the classroom to the room in which they're examined, and they don't always manage that. But we probably want a bit more than that. We probably want them to take some of the things that they learned in school outside into the rest of their lives, and hopefully that's something that happens. I should point out, you might have seen that picture before. It's an internet fake. You couldn't actually take that picture, could you? Don't worry, it's just a visual metaphor. It doesn't matter that it's an internet fake. It's just to sort of point out that the tip of the iceberg is what we get to see in our lessons. We get to see what children do, and everything that we can see is comes under the umbrella of performance. So whether they're solving an equation or writing an essay or putting a hand up to ask a question or making a pencil case or conjugating a verb, whatever it is that they're doing, it's performance. So we only ever get to see performance. Learning is something that we don't have any ability to perceive in the here and now. So if you go back to that definition about retention and transfer, I can't see whether you're going to remember anything that I've told you. I'd have to, check later on. I'm not going to do that. And I can't tell whether you're going to be able to transfer and apply any of the things that we talk about today in your classrooms, in your lessons. I'd have to follow you about and scrutinise you, which again, I'm not going to do that. So all I can see is your performance, and actually not even that much of that. The way it's set out this morning, I can see basically, I can see people sort of smiling and nodding, and I can see other people sort of, reading something else, and all of that sort of gives me sort of clues about what I think might be going on. But it's not. It's a really, really rough proxy, and I know to my cost over the years that I've got that wrong loads of times with the kids that I've taught. And one of the sort of students that sticks in my mind was a lad. I'm going to call him Carl, and I taught Carl for a couple of years through his GCSEs. I taught him English, and Carl, he wasn't a bad boy at all. He was the sort of lad that just spent every available opportunity looking out of the window, wishing he was elsewhere. He would make sculptures out of the contents of his pencil case and that kind of thing, and getting work out of him was really challenging. It was like getting blood out of a stone. And I tried everything. I'd give him talking tos. I'd phone his mum and say, I can't get him to do any work, and she'd say, I know, and nothing I did seemed to make any difference. He just did his own thing, and I thought, sort of towards halfway through year 11, I thought, I'm just going to stop beating my head against the wall. I'm going to leave Carl to his own devices. I'm going to work with a coalition of the willing, and what will be will be. And that's what I did, whether rightly or wrongly. And then fast forward to the end of August when the exam results were coming in, and I was looking at my class's results, and Carl had got an A. The bastard. I couldn't believe it. I thought, how did that happen? And why didn't she get an A? She worked so hard. Anyway, I went in the next day, like the results day, and all the kids there picking up their results, and I saw Carl, and I thought, I'm going to go over and just ask him how that happened. So I went over and said, congratulations. I said, Carl, how did, I just didn't expect that at all. How did you end up getting an A? And he said, it was all going in, sir. Then he walked off, and that was the last I ever saw of him. And I would have, but the thing is, I would have bet money that it wasn't going in. I knew that he wasn't learning, he wasn't making any progress. And what did I know? The unusual thing about Carl is that he just wasn't interested in displaying any of the behaviours that we like to see as teachers. He just didn't care about what I thought of him at all. to the point where, you know, he didn't, most kids, the vast majority of children I've taught will give you a bit of what you want and sort of, you know, because they do want your good opinion, and Carl didn't care. And, you know, as I say, I'd have bet money that he wasn't learning in my lesson, and I'd have lost that money. But I've definitely had it in reverse as well. All of the students that I've taught where I thought, right, they've nailed it, they've got this in the bag, and then they haven't. And I don't know if you've ever had that. It's very dispiriting when it happens. And it all sort of feeds into this point that you can't see learning. You can see what people are doing in the here and now, but you can't see what they're doing elsewhere and later, unless you go. And even then, you wait a bit and you go somewhere else, and again, you're seeing a performance. You're seeing the present, that thin slice of time that we exist in. We can't see the future. Sometimes it can become increasingly confident. We're going to talk a little bit about this, you know, the judgments that we're making are based on good data, but we can never really see learning. And I've just got a caricature of this, just to underline the point. And what's going to happen, I haven't told Danielle this, we're going to do a quick bit of role play, which I know she loves. It's going to be painless, Danielle. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a question, and you can answer the question however you like. Is that all right? That wasn't the question. Okay. No, but that's fine. Okay, so here's the question. And the rest of you can join in, play the game in your heads if you want to. Danielle, what is the capital city of Chad? Yes, well done. Round of applause for Danielle. We could work on the pronunciation a little bit, N'Djamena, but that's really, really good. Well done. Great learning, wonderful progress. Let's move on. Now that is a caricature, but it's a lot like the sorts of things that I spent years doing in my lessons, where we're finished now. Thanks. I know. Thank you. You did very well. Where I'd say to kids, can you remember what I just taught you? And they'd say, yeah. And I'd go, great learning. Or actually, a lot of the time they'd say, you know, I'd say, can you remember what I just showed you how to do 10 minutes ago? And they'd say, no. And I'd say things like, well, you know, look back in your book, talk to your partner. It's on the board. And then they give me the answer that it was clear that I wanted them to give. And I'd say, great, good learning, well done, great progress, let's move on. And I think that, you know, a lot of the time, not always by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot of the time, the performances that we see in our lessons, and certainly this is the way I engineered it a lot of the time, unwittingly, without really knowing what I was doing. I'd engineered, mimicked performances where kids are brilliant at working out the answer that you want them to give. And you can sort of spot mimicry because they'll be uncertain and they'll say, is it, you were doing that face, by the way, is it, and they'll give the answer, and then you say, yes, and then their body language changes and they go, I thought so, good. And so the issue with this is that, well, one, we're taking feedback from students' performances, which is erroneous. We're thinking that they've learned things. We're actually, you know, that mimics performance they gave is pretty shallow. It's not going to be very durable or flexible. It's not worth that much. It's great that they were able to do something in the here and now, but so what? That's not the point. What about elsewhere and later? But so that's one side of it. But I think the other side, potentially the more dangerous side, is that students believe that in their own minds that they know things that they don't know. And I think this is endemic, this is typical. Children routinely think they know things they don't know. They remember that things happened. And we'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later on. But it's the illusion of knowledge. So we all labour under the illusion of knowledge. We all think we know things that we don't actually know. And so one of my favourite little psychological studies asked subjects to whether they could draw a picture of a bicycle. And obviously, you all know what a bicycle looks like, and you can bring them to mind. But actually recreating that knowledge is potentially harder than we think it is. So what they did in this study is they gave subjects a pre-drawn bicycle frame, so there were no art skills required, and they said, basically, can you draw on the pedals and the chain? And it turned out that 70% of their subjects couldn't do that. And here's some of the responses that they came up with. And, you know, look at that one. That's not going anywhere, is it? You know, and what happens is we know what a bike looks like. We're really good at spotting them. If we see something that looks like a bike, we go through this instantaneous process of going, bike, not bike. You know, that's a bike, that isn't a bike. And we're brilliant at that. We're brilliant at recognizing things. What we're really bad at is reassembling that knowledge and recreating it, which is unfortunate because the education system that we operate in asks children to do that very thing under, you know, exam conditions periodically. And so if exams were just about recognition, it was just like, here's a list of stuff, just tick off the things you remember, they'd be brilliant. Yeah, I remember that. But it's not. That's not what we want them to do. We want them to recreate. So that's harder. And I think that what sort of happens when we're asked to do something like this, most of us, we bring a bike to mind and we think about, you know, we sit on a saddle and we hold the handlebars and the pedals and the chain, they're down there somewhere. You know, I know they're there. I'm not sure what they do. Now, if you're a cyclist, if you're a regular cyclist, you're probably much better able to do this. And they found that the 30% of people, roughly, who were able to do this were regular cyclists on the whole. And so had a much, much better working knowledge of bicycles than most of us who perhaps haven't ridden a bike since we were kids. We've got this vague, this illusion. And this is typical. This is exactly what happens in students' mind when they leave your lesson. They remember something, and they'll remember getting the answer right. Getting the answer right is very memorable. They just can't remember what it was. So a prediction is that that's going to be endemic. Okay, I'm going to assume, am I right to assume that people know this quite well?
Lots of colleagues have been attending the session.
Yeah, okay. So I'm not going to labour this point, but it's just a very simplified diagram of the process of learning, of what goes on in our minds, what we think goes on. So the key point here is that the part of your brain that you think with, like the bit that feels like you, the bit where you have conscious thoughts, where you're thinking, oh, how much longer is this going to last? All of that's happening in working memory. And your working memory is a really, really tightly finite space where you can only do a few things at once. And the more you try and do, the more forgetful and frustrated you're likely to get. So it's very constrained. Long-term memory there is pretty much infinite, and you'll never run out of space throughout your long life. You can put as much as experience as you will have. You'll be able to fit that into your long-term memory. I don't know if do any of you recognise the image that I've chosen for long-term memory there? Oh, good knowledge. Who said that? Ah, yes. Well done. Yes, it is. It's a still from the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And if you haven't seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, well, look, it's like from the 80s. Oh, my God. I don't care. You should go. Anyway, so spoilers. At the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones has brought the Ark of the Covenant. He's nicked it, basically, and taken it to America. And the American government take it off him, and they nail it up into a wooden crate, which they label top secret, and then it gets stored in this vast warehouse full of identical wooden crates. It's safe, it's in there, but nobody's ever going to find it again. And that's a bit like some of the stuff in your long-term memory. It's in there, you don't necessarily have any access to it. So a little bit, you know, this is theorized. Nobody has the ability to look into their own long-term memory because the act of trying to do so will inevitably take place in working memory. So what we think goes on in your long-term memory is a little bit like this. This is sort of based on experimentation and guesses. But let's say you know one thing. So that green dot, and I'm going to make that green dot that now represents something. So that green dot is going to mean, it's going to represent a phrase from a foreign language. And so the phrase it's going to represent is ni hao. Just a really quick show of hands. Any of you recognise that phrase? Don't. Oh, great. Okay. Has anyone not know that? Never heard of that before? Oh, brilliant. Okay, good. Okay, so ni hao is that green dot. Now, this second green dot is what ni hao means in English. So some of you know that already. Some of you have got a link between ni hao and what it means in English. But you haven't. But I promise you, you've got the second green dot already stored. You know the English translation. Now, the difficulty here is, like, if I came, you know, if somebody asked, like in a few months, what was that word he said, that ginger fella, what was that word? It would be really hard for somebody that didn't know what it meant to recall that, because it's just a sound. So you might remember it with enough prompting, but it would be really difficult. But when information bonds together with prior knowledge, it becomes much easier. So what I'm going to do, sir, live now with you is basically inscribe a green line in your mind between ni hao and its English translation. And it will be painless. Are you up for that? Yeah. Okay. So, great. Every day's a learning day. Absolutely right. So, who was somebody that did know what it meant? Go on. Do you want to tell us? Hello. It means hello. Do you know what language it is? Mandarin. Yes. Well done. So it's the Mandarin word phrase for how are you, literally, but hello. It's a greeting. Hello. So now we've got that line. So now we've increased the likelihood you'll remember that, because what could happen now is somebody might say in the future, what does ni hao mean? And you'll think, oh, I think it's hello, you know. Or somebody might say to you, what's the Mandarin for hello? And you might remember it's ni hao. Not necessarily, but we've really increased the possibility of recall. And the more Mandarin that you learned, I'm not going to do any more, that's it. No more Mandarin, I'm afraid. But the more Mandarin phrases you learn, basically the lesson is, the easier it is to recall all the Mandarin that you know. To the point where eventually you would become fluent. Are you a fluent Mandarin? No. Is anyone? Okay, you're going to have to take my word for this. If you're a fluent Mandarin speaker, it's impossible to forget ni hao. You never get, like, if you picture a scene, Tiananmen Square, a couple of Chinese people meeting and going, there's a thing that we say, I can't, you know, it just wouldn't happen. In the same way that it's impossible for you to forget how to say hello. There's lots of things you might forget to say, but you could never imagine a scenario where you wouldn't be able to remember how to say hello. And to the point, interestingly, where with language, with simple linguistic exchanges, we can do those without any recourse to long-term memory at all, or any conscious recourse. What I mean is without needing to engage our working memory, just relying entirely on long-term memory. So, and you can tell this. Do you know? My last birthday, I really noticed it. So it was my birthday, and a couple of times on my birthday, people said, "Happy birthday," and I said, "Yeah, you too." But it wasn't their birthday, so there was a slightly odd moment where they realised I hadn't really been listening to what they'd said. And you know, we do this, you know, and it's quite jarring when it happens. You know, you'll suddenly snap in and go, "Oh, I've said something slightly inappropriate," because you were running on autopilot. And that's how we know we can speak literally without engaging our conscious minds. And we do this with driving the whole time. You know, you go from being a novice driver where, you know, just changing gear is a big deal to everyone has this eventually. You know, you think, God, I can't remember, and no memory of the last half hour. How did I get here? Did I kill someone? You didn't kill someone, because if you had, your working memory would have snapped back in and it would have taken over. you know, what we do, what happens is we automatize whatever we can. That's a feature of our minds. Wherever we can automatize something, we do. So language is a good example of that, and so's driving. And you know, the difficulty that we're faced with in schools, in classrooms, is that the stuff that we want children to learn is not as amenable to automatization. It can be automatized, and to a large extent, you have automatized it. There's a lot of stuff in your subject and areas of expertise where you have automatized the ability to do things. And the difficulty for you at that point is it becomes really, really hard for us as teachers to remember how we acquired the skill that we possess. And because we sometimes often struggle to remember the skills, how we got the skill that we've got, it's then really, really difficult to teach children to do the things that we can do. And so as a young teacher, I remember I would say things to kids in my first year or so as teacher. I'd say things to them like, I'd like you to analyse this passage. And they'd say, what do you mean? And I'd say, look, just analyse it. And some of them kind of worked out what I meant and would go, is that what you meant? And I'd go, yeah, that is, look everyone, that's what I meant, well done. And then some of them wouldn't work it out, and I'd just think to myself, what can you do with kids like that? Tried my best. And that's where the whole gap widening, gap narrowing thing's coming in, because guess what the backgrounds of the kids that worked it out were, on average. And guess the backgrounds of the kids that couldn't work it out. And we routinely and typically, we leave massive gaps in our teaching. And the kids, typically from the more socially advantaged backgrounds, have the wherewithal to fill some of those gaps and work out what we're on about. And loads of other kids fall through the gaps we leave. Sometimes we blame them for it. Okay, so now joining all this together, this is something, I can't remember the amount of times people have said to me, you know, the whole purpose of school is pointless because I literally can't remember anything I learned at school. Everything I know, I learned elsewhere. I didn't learn any of it in school. I don't know, have you ever heard that? It's absolute bullshit. It's not true, but it's beguiling, it's seductive. We think it's true because of a feature of how our memories work. So we've got two different types of memory stores, one of which is, by psychologists, is called semantic memory. And this is the ability to recall facts independent of context. So it's remembering that Paris is the capital of France, or, you know, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. It's all stuff like that you can recall independent of context. And so typically, people don't tend to remember where they learned semantic information. Typically. We don't learn where we learnt to read. We can't remember where we learnt to read, how we learnt to read. We just can read. And we go, I didn't learn anything at school except how to do all of these things conveniently that I can do. You just can't remember where you learnt them. The remembering where bit is episodic memory. This is our ability to reconstruct events and experiences, which is very, very context dependent. So you will have, for instance, loads of memories of being at school as students, you know, that are episodes. So one that stands vividly in my mind is being in a biology lab, and you know, like in the corner of a science lab, I think by law there's a human skeleton, isn't there, in the corner? And for some weird reason, I no longer know why, the skeleton fell over. I don't know if somebody pushed it or whatever, but it fell over and it kind of came apart. And the biology teacher, my biology teacher, Mrs. Johnson, said, you will remember that happening for the rest of your life. And she's right, I do. Well, I have no idea what point she was trying to make, or, you know, what she was trying to teach us something. It's gone. So it's really tempting for me to say I didn't learn anything in biology, except I've got all of this semantic information which is not rooted to context. Where did that come from? Well, some of it came from Mrs. Johnson's biology lessons. I mean, not as much as, you know, it should have, because I was a bit of a toe rag, but that's a different matter. But the point is, we can't remember where we learned loads of the stuff we learned. And we can always remember where episodic memories came from, because that's their nature. And so it's beguiling to think like that. So one of the key things, I think, in our efforts to gap narrow rather than gap widen is to prioritise knowledge. And I just really briefly want to talk to you about why it matters. So I'm going to say, you know, we all care about thoughts, thinking. We care about kids being creative and being able to think critically and all of this sort of stuff. But the key point here is that you cannot think about something you don't know. Try that for a minute. Try and think of something you've never heard of. You can think of things that you don't know much about, can't you? Like, for instance, you could sit there thinking, what's quantum physics? I'm a physicist, obviously. I'm not going to be doing that. You're going to be going, come on, everyone knows what quantum physics is. So the point is, you cannot think about something you don't know. And the more you know, so those of you that are physicists that know what quantum physics is, can have quite interesting thoughts about quantum physics, where the rest of us are just going, well, you know, what is it? And that's the level of thought we're able to have. The more you know, the more interesting the thoughts you can have, the more creative you can be, the more likely you are to go, what happens if I change that? But what's that? That is knowledge. And you can start thinking, hang on, I'm not sure whether that's true, and you can start thinking critically. But again, that might not be true is knowledge. You can't think about something that you don't know. The more you know, the easier it is to have interesting thoughts. And this is exactly the same for the students you teach. The more they know, the better they are at thinking. So just a couple of little instances of how knowledge works. So I've got a little activity for you now, which you can either take part in or not. It's up to you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flash up a sequence of numbers, 12 numbers. Don't know why I'm doing that. It's 5, isn't it? 12 numbers. I haven't got 12 fingers, so I don't know. And I'm going to show them to you for 5 seconds. And your job, if you can be bothered, is to try and remember them in sequence. Now, I've been asked, and I've done this before, and people have said, can I write them down? Obviously, that's cheating. You're only cheating yourself. It's up to you. So I'll leave that with you and your conscience. So 5 seconds, starting now. Has anyone got it? Yes. 601, 681, Yes.
601, 681, 612, 916.
Yes. Round of applause. Very good. Can I ask you how you went about doing that? Yeah, and I could hear that from the way you represented the numbers. You reeled them, and you were doing the same. Where have you were doing the same thing, weren't you? And yeah, and so 4 chunks of 3 that conveniently fits with the navigable limits of working memory. We're much better. Still a challenge, which is why you came unstuck right at the end there, because I know. It's really so it's achievable, but it's a challenge. Now, I'm going to do the same thing again. So, same digits in a different order. Those of you that struggled with that are going to find this one easy. So we're going to go now for 100% success. Are you ready? Now if I take them away now, it's easy to recall them, isn't it? Most of you will be able to do that because, I'm not even going to test it, because you recognise those numbers, that they have meaning now, don't they? They're tapping into something in your long-term memory. So 1066, you're probably visualising some poor fellow being shot in the face with an arrow. 1812, maybe you're hearing some cannon fire, maybe a bit of Tchaikovsky. Historians amongst you are going, it's the Battle of Borodino. The 1966, I think there was some sort of sporting event that took place, which you may or may not remember. And the point, the difference between those two tasks is knowledge. The reason why the second version was easier was because of what you know. And if it wasn't easy, it's because you didn't know. Those dates didn't have relevant meaning for you. But even if the dates didn't have relevant meaning for you, the fact that they're presented as dates makes them easier, because we code 1812 rather than 1812. And that's easier, to do. It's interesting that we typically, people with the first version, people always break this into 3s rather than 4s. But dates, we like dates. We find that easy. Anyway, here's another version of that. So here, now we've got a sentence. And the thing with this sentence is it's really hard to make sense of. And it's hard to make sense of because you don't know what the acronyms mean. And the reason that I know you don't know what the acronyms mean is because I've made them up. But they act like little vortexes. They sort of pull your attention into themselves. And so what ought to be a really straightforward activity becomes challenging. But look how easy it becomes when you recognize the acronyms. Now it's straightforward. Now there's no challenge. And that is a sort of illustration of why, for instance, children with poor vocabulary knowledge struggle to do things that children with good vocabulary knowledge don't struggle at all to do. The difference between those two sentences is knowledge. That's what it is. So going back to the title of the thing that we started with, was this idea of putting success before struggle. And I think we don't get this routinely right in education. We routinely we ask children to struggle before they've experienced success. And if you think carefully about this, very few of us are happy to engage in activities where we've had no experience of success, but still we're asked to do something that's hard. Very few of us do that in our lives. As adults, we tend to only do things that we're relatively successful at. We have brief periods in our lives, like when you first trained to be teachers, those first couple of years, perhaps, you were uncomfortable with doing something that you found difficult, and now you're good at it. Now it's easy, and it's just gravy now, isn't it? No, I'm not suggesting that. So as a continuum, I think this is what needs to happen for students, that they need to experience really explicit teaching, loads of feedback, lots of modelling, lots of worked examples, so that they can experience success with a lot of help and support. That at a certain point, the support needs to be removed. And this is the difference between sat-nav and map reading. So sat-nav, effortless. You just follow your sat-nav. Sat-nav's perfect assessment for learning machine. It knows exactly where you are. You tell it your goal. It gives you step-by-step feedback on your progress. If you make a mistake, it goes, that doesn't matter, do this instead. And you achieve your goal, and you think, well, I'm really good at this navigation lark. Back in the day, before I had a sat-nav, and I used to have to map read, I'm a rubbish map reader. I'm the sort of person that I would have to stop my car every now and again, get out, rotate the A to Z to align with the street layout. And it was so effortful that wherever possible, I would try and memorize the route. And I would put a lot of mental energy into memorizing routes. I don't bother doing that so much with satellite navigation, because it's so easy. So a lot of with sat-nav, it's easy, you're successful, you get that experience of being successful. Students need that. But if that's all they ever get, then they're unlikely to retain any of it. So they need that taken away once they've experienced success. When you've experienced success, then you're kind of prepared to do something a little bit more challenging. You've got an experience of, I know I've done it. I know I've got one in my book that's a good one. and I'm a little bit more prepared to do one that's challenging without so much help. And then eventually, you know, when they leave us, anything that's not in their heads might as well have not happened. They only leave with what's in their heads. So we need to get to that point. If we're not moving from sat-nav to map reading at some point, then they'll not be having that much in their heads. Does that make sense? Sort of, maybe. Okay. Right, well, so thinking about sort of what this looks like in lessons. So we've said we've got a limited working memory capacity, and that tends to get filled with when you're doing a task. You're doing something. At the moment, you're doing something really easy. You're just listening. But when you're, some of you will be really engaging, perhaps, and sort of really thinking carefully about what's being said, and that's more demanding. Some of you are just letting it soak over you, and that's fine. But when you're asked to do something for which you're going to be accountable, then that you instantly experience some cognitive load. And so some of that is intrinsic. So the blue part of that box that's the necessary load of the complication of the task. That's how difficult the task is. The red part, the extraneous load, that's distraction. And so distraction is stuff that is not necessary. Maybe it's some background noise going on, someone's mowing their lawn or something, or someone's asking you to do something at the same time. All of that sort of thing is extraneous. So I've introduced a little bit of green into that limited working memory capacity now, because if we don't have a bit of green space for schema acquisition, those green dots that we saw being mapped out earlier from ni hao to hello, then we don't remember anything. So we need to have space. The act of remembering takes some working memory capacity. So if we don't have any left over, if we're full of the effort it takes to do a task plus distraction, then we're unlikely to remember much of what we did beyond the experience of doing it. And as might be obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway, the more space that's left over for schema acquisition, the more likely students are to remember the things that we want them to remember. So what gets squeezed to make space for schema acquisition? Well, you can't squeeze the intrinsic load because that's the difficulty of the task you've set for students. You have to squeeze the extraneous load. You have to reduce distraction. Now, some of that's straightforward. We say to kids, right, okay, we're working in silence for this bit. Heads down, get on with it. What did I say? When you were trying to remember those numbers, I heard somebody shushing somebody else. There was a bit of disruption. Quickly got shushed by a colleague. Exactly right, because they were providing extraneous load, which was really irritating for you. And so you had less room for schema acquisition. So we're going to think about how this plays out and what that looks like in the classroom. How do we get rid of that extraneous load? What is it beyond just classroom hubbub? Just a bit of, what is it beyond that? So the idea of cognitive load is that it's the demand of the task, the intrinsic demand of the task, and that's divided by the resources that you've got available to you. So ideally, the resources are going to be internal, schema, that exist in your long-term memory. So for you as teachers, that's probably going to be the case. For most of the stuff you teach, you've got a schema which you can fall back on, pull out, and look clever. But students you teach don't have that yet. The job is that they try and get that. So you have external resources to help them get there. And those external resources are your teaching, your feedback, the questions you ask, but also the resources that, the actual physical resources you give kids, stuff you put on your classroom wall, all of that. And so the task can be thought of in these two ways. So the quality of the task, that's the intrinsic load. And we're good at that as teachers. We know, easy one first, then a bit harder, then the hardest one. We do that instinctively most of the time, most of us. What we're less instinctive about is quantity. So we fail to recognise that doing a lot of something is harder work than doing a little bit of it. So doing what typically happens a lot in school is we ask children to do too much and they get exhausted. And you see this in books, you know, the quality starts here and then it tails off. And they start practicing doing things badly. If you practice doing things badly, you get worse at doing them, in nobody's interest. So doing high quality, short bursts of high quality stuff is far better. You can increase the intrinsic load, the quality, and decrease the quantity to help balance that load. With the external resources here, you know, we need them, we put them in, experience success, and then we take them out once they've experienced success. If you don't take them out, then they just depend on them. They become dependent. So an interesting thing to sort of ask of yourselves is, have you got anything, for instance, on your classroom wall that you would like to be in your students' long-term memory? Because if you have, the fact that it's on the wall reduces the likelihood that they'll remember it. Because they'll just do that whenever they need to. I remember I visited a primary school a while back where they were asking, you know, they were saying, we're really struggling to get kids to learn times tables. Why do you think that is? We're doing all of this stuff. And I said to them, after a little bit of investigation, they've all got number squares in the back of their maths books. There's no need for them to remember times tables. What they're doing is they're turning to the back of their book every time they do a multiplication. It's sat-nav. There's no requirement for them to go through the effort of memorization. So if the stuff that you would like them to remember on your walls, try taking it off and seeing if they know it. And if they don't, maybe think through what that should look like. So, going to give you a time check, Danielle?
It is 9:23.
So what does that mean? I've completely forgotten when we started. Is that 7 minutes? 15 minutes, all right, okay. All right. So here's the thing. I know you're getting restless. I know, sorry. Here's the thing. This is what happens. In your class, your students, your class, they can concentrate on solving problems, doing difficult things, writing essays, doing hard sums, whatever it is that you want them to do. They can concentrate on all of that stuff. And they can allocate some of their working memory to trying to remember how to do that in the future. But they probably can't do those things at the same time. And the sort of slightly terrifying thing to think about is it's routine for children to successfully solve problems in classrooms and not remember how they did it. To have a really strong illusion of knowledge. Yes, I've done that. I was really good at that. How did you do it? Can't remember. And I'll give you an example of that. So this weekend, the clock's changed. Most of the clocks in my life are really straightforward. It's like my phone, it just does itself by magic. Like my watch, I just wind it forwards. The clock in my car has been designed by some sort of idiot. And I'm going to have to spend the next 6 months of it telling the wrong time. Unless, what typically happens, that'll be the case for a few weeks, and then I'll get the manual out, and I'll look up how to solve the problem. And then I follow the instructions, set the time, and think, why are there so many buttons required anyway? So what happens there, every 6 months, I successfully solve the problem of how to correct the clock in my car, but I learn nothing. I don't remember how to do it. And that's what's happening in classrooms up and down the country. Day in, day out, lesson in, lesson out. And it's because, and this is the really, really, really challenging bit, is the problems that we get children to solve create extraneous load. The goal of teaching is, or should be, for children to remember things elsewhere and later and to be able to do stuff with the stuff we've taught them. The goal of teaching is not kids being successful in your lesson. That doesn't matter. That's irrelevant. Nobody cares whether they're successful in your lesson if they can't be successful out of your lesson. So the goal has got to be to make them successful after they've left your lesson. But our alignment is, yeah, but we want kids to perform well in our lessons. Of course we do. And that leads us to do things which are actively unhelpful for our students. We never do it deliberately. Inadvertently, we might be doing it quite a lot. And if that's the case, then really, really briefly, in the few minutes I've got left, I'm just going to map out a few ideas of the sorts of things that reduce that load and give them enough space. Because there's, the other thing to say here is that sometimes we do things to engage students, to make our lessons enjoyable, which, obviously we want them to enjoy our lessons, but that then becomes extraneous load as well. This became really clear to me sort of a few years ago, working with a colleague who she wanted her students to learn about some of Seamus Heaney's poetry, and she thought it would be useful if they had some knowledge of the Irish potato famine and the depopulation of rural Ireland caused by that. And so she did this lesson where she asked her students to imagine that they were Irish peasants, starving, and she said, right, so you're all Irish peasants. I've hidden some potatoes in the classroom, and I want you to, but not enough for everyone. So have a look, see if you can find a potato, and if you find one, you've survived, and if you haven't, you're dead. And so they did that, and they really enjoyed it, and they, well, I've got a potato, I haven't, I'm dead. And then we decided what we do the next lesson is we just test out this idea, this theory about what they'd learned. And so they all had incredibly strong episodic memories. They all remembered, things like, well, whether or not they found a potato. And then we said to them, do you remember why we did that? And they said, no, we didn't. No, we don't. We've no idea why we did that. But we really liked it. And that experience made me think back years ago. So I had this Year 9 class when Year 9 SATs were a thing, and they had to learn Romeo and Juliet for their Year 9 SATs. And this class that I had then, they were not interested in doing that. And in order to sort of trick them into engaging with Romeo and Juliet, I got them making sock puppets of the characters, and then they acted out these little sort of modern vignettes of various scenes from the play with their sock puppets. Most of them did these really awful, like Jeremy Kyle type things. That sort of, and anyway, eventually they did all that, and eventually they had to do some reading and writing. And I said to one of my students, you had to answer a question about Mercutio, Romeo's friend. And he said, I don't know anything about Mercutio. And I said to him, I remember you made a sock puppet of Mercutio. So I want you to think back, and you acted out Mercutio in your rubbish Jeremy Kyle thing. I want you to think back and see if you can remember anything at all about the character of Mercutio. And he thought for a bit, and he said, I think he was blue. And the point is that children learn what they think about. And if they thought about the likely hiding place for a potato or how to make a sock puppet, that's what they'll remember, because that's what they thought about. If they're not thinking about the purpose behind there, they don't remember that. They don't acquire the semantic memories that we need them to fully access the curriculum and be academically successful. And so that's a gap widening activity, because the children from the most socially advantaged backgrounds, they're more likely to work it out. They're more likely to be okay with that and sort of have the wherewithal and go home and say to their mum, why did we do that? And their mum says, oh, I reckon it's this. The less socially advantaged students are far more likely to fall into that gap we've left. So, really, really quickly, before we move on, instead of problem solving too soon, fully worked examples. So this is an example of a fully worked thesis statement in English, where I've really talked through how this works. So I'm asking students again and again and again to do one-sentence answers. So we nail absolutely perfect sentences, which I go over again and again and again to the point to the point. One of the really useful mantras: don't practice until kids get it right. Practice until they can no longer get it wrong. So the less you ask them to do, the higher the quality but shorter the activity, the more likely you can make that a reality. So here, I really hammer them with subordinating conjunctions to the point where they just know what that is. I don't have to explain it anymore because they hear it 16 times a lesson. And so we go over again and again and again how to do that. Here's how they work in maths. Exact same thing. You talk through a fully worked example again and again and again and again. Now this one is a problem pair. So here you've got your worked example that you've talked through, so everybody understands, and now you go, right, now you're going to do a bit of limited problem solving because we've put success first, so the struggle is minimal. You're going to do a little bit of struggle, but we're going to have plenty of space left for schema acquisition. You just need to remember the steps that we've just been through. And that's much more useful to students, especially those students, than asking them to solve the problem without that first step. Here's a problem pair in English. This is the way I would do it in my lessons. There's we've fully worked example where we've talked through exactly what I want you to do. Now you've got an identically structured problem where you're going to just remember the instruction that you've had. So limited, tiny amounts of problem solving. Then fading out the degree of teacher input. So faded instruction where we give students progressively less and less of the steps required. So over time, they're having to do more problem solving, but with that really strong schema of success embedded early on and revisited often. And that is far more likely to disproportionately benefit the children who need it most. So I'm just going to, because I've banged on and I've done too much else, I'm just going to skip to the end. So there was some really good stuff, which we haven't got time for, but we're going to do this bit at the end. I hope that comes up. We've got... All right, I'll do one thing, which you'll like. You'll like that. Well, you'll like this. It's a quiz. So what we're going to do is we're going to play around with something called the hypercorrection effect, which is a great way to induce helpful struggle in students once they've got a schema of success. So the quiz has got absolutely nothing to do with anything that I've said today. It's general knowledge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and don't shout out. Answer them in your head, and then we'll see how you did. So here's the first question. Have you got an answer for that in your head? Great. Okay. Everyone got an answer for that? Yep. And then the last one. Yeah? Okay. Let's see how you did. So, number 1, put your hands up if your answer was the Great Wall of China. It's not. You're wrong. You're wrong. It's not the Great Wall of China. So here's... It's not, no. So here, this is a great story. So Glenn Ford, I think it was, one of the early NASA astronauts, orbiting the Earth in these Saturn whatever, Apollo, I don't know what they called it. Anyway, he was orbiting the Earth, and he's gone, oh, look, there's the Great Wall of China. He was pointing at a river, but nobody kind of realised that until years later. So the story was, oh, Great Wall of China visible with the naked eye from space. But it's not. You can't see it. Like, there's lots of people, astronauts who've been up subsequently go, no, can't see it. There's lots of man-made structures that are visible to the naked eye at night because they're brightly lit. But the Great Wall of China, not brightly lit at night, not visible at night or day. So the answer is lots, but not the Great Wall of China. Okay, number 2. Hands up, those of you that said 5. No! It's not 5. Now, there's a scholarly debate about this. And so experts in human senses, there's a range from 27 to 18. I know. Who knew? Who knew? And it includes things. They say it includes things like like balance, like proprioception, sort of knowing where bits of your body are without having to check. The internal and external temperature gauges, things like the sense that you're being watched, you know, when you get goose flesh come up, that sort of, all of those things, they count as human senses. So the answer, if the question had been what are the main human senses, then I'd have taken 5. But they're the main 5. There are lots of others, somewhere between 18 and 27. You can see where this is going now, can't you? So the answer to the third one isn't the ostrich. And again, this is a nice story because the belief that the ostrich sticks its heads in the sand goes back to the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, who said they did, and nobody checked. And they were like, oh, did they? And they don't. And there's a really, and it's really, you know, obviously, if they did do that, they'd suffocate, wouldn't they? And that would be a very poor survival adaptation. There would be no ostriches. If you bring an ostrich to mind, you can probably, what does it look like? What do you reckon it's good at if it's scared? Yeah, that's what they do. They leg off really quickly. They can run like, I think they can run for short distances. They can run about sort of 60 miles an hour. They really peg it. There's few things that can run more quickly than them. And that's what, so no birds do that, because it would be an idiot move for birds. So what, now, here's the thing. What you have just experienced, I hope, is the hypercorrection effect. And the hypercorrection effect is this idea that the more certain you are of an answer which turns out to be wrong, the more likely you are to correct that in your long-term memory. So my prediction here is that you're going to go to your graves knowing that ostriches don't stick their heads in the sand, that you can't see the Great Wall of China with the naked eye from space, and that, and obviously some of you are going to go home and check, I realise that, and that there are more than 5 human senses. You might not remember the numbers, but you will know there's more than 5, and you can be pub quiz bored in the future about that. But you're not going to forget that, because you have hyper-corrected it. I mean, I would say test yourselves out on that in a few weeks, if you can remember any of those things. I bet you can. And the point here is that you know, children, we know, routinely have all sorts of misconceptions. They come to us with lots of misconceptions. My favourite as an English teacher is the misconception of you put a comma where you take a breath. And I always say, what if you've just been for a run? What if you've got asthma? Well, it can't be right, can it? Because there'd be a lot of commas, which explains some kids' writing. You know, and you will know lots of those misconceptions in your subjects, and you'll be able to predict a lot of them. And the point is, you know, that some of the, I'm sure you do lots of retrieval practice. You all do lots of retrieval practice and quizzing in lessons. The point here is deliberately trigger wrong answers. Ask trick questions deliberately to get kids to commit to wrong answers, and then go, brilliant, I'm really glad you gave the wrong answer. Now we can explore why that's wrong and what the correct answer is. And the likelihood there is that they will hyper-correct. So the idea, the more high confidence the error is, the more likely it is to be hyper-corrected rather than just corrected. So just finishing off. I'm going back to the gap widening, gap narrowing idea that we started with at the beginning. Your most advantaged students are often, sometimes, successful regardless or even despite what we do. If you want to see whether you're doing a decent job, don't even look at the data for those kids. They just mislead us. And we go, oh, I must be doing well because those ones have done fine. They would have been fine anywhere with anyone doing anything, probably. Only look at the kids who are most disadvantaged. If they're successful, it's almost certainly because of you. And if they're not successful, then rethink what you're doing based on that. Are you allowing them to wander around with really strong illusions of knowledge? really strong episodic memories of the fun things that happen with no semantic recall of those things when it's needed later on. So they can recognise bikes, but they can't draw the pedals and the chain. And if that's the sort of thing that we're inadvertently doing, we find that out by looking at the data for the most disadvantaged kids and finding out, well, okay, if they're not doing well, there's no good me blaming them. It's not their fault. That's on us. That we've left too many gaps in our instruction, which they've fallen through. How do we close those gaps? How do we move to gapless instruction? How do we get better and better at what we're doing? How do we use, many more worked examples front-loaded, which we fade out slowly over time so they experience success, and then we can ask them to struggle. And they've got more space to embed the schema that we need them to embed to be academically successful. Does that make sense? Great. Well, that's it. I hope that you've found some of that interesting and useful. If you haven't, I'm really sorry. I tried my best. But thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much to David. I know you've given us a lot to think about. There are 12 workshops on today. I know you could only sign up for 2. But shared with you at the end of the day will be the resources from every single workshop and operation. So do take the opportunity to kind of peek into the other folders. I also really recommend David's blog, The Learning Spy. There's a lot of stuff that David's alluded to. I know that he's skipped some of the stuff as well because time runs away with itself, and all of these things can be found on his blog as well as the slides that he's kindly shared with us as well. For the rest of the day, your programme is in your programme. Yeah.
Sorry.
A number of them, which are printed in the booklet. Everything you need is in your booklets. Please take note of the timings for lunch. We're going to stagger lunch just a little bit to support our colleagues in the restaurant. So on to the most important thing at any conference, which is the food. You've got your comfort break now, you've got refreshments coming up, you've got lunch coming up, you've all signed up for that. And we meet back here after our reflections in different faculty areas. You've got your maps in the booklet, you've also got the group that you're joining on a number of different boards, so take a look. We meet back here at 3 o'clock. Okay, so I hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you very much.